India did not get independence in 1947. India got dominion status. India
No, this can't be real.
It is true.
No.
Please look it up.
Oh my god, seriously.
But there is another thing. The British could have extended their stay in India longer. But something happened in 1946.
Could have Indian army done the same thing now, what the naval mutiny done? If they did it, we would have got independence much earlier, right?
So Mr. Patel gave a false promise.
Oh my god.
This is a matter of record. And the Indian army was greatly influenced by Subhash Bose and his Indian National Army. There was a great amount of sympathy for what Subhash Chandra Bose was doing. So Mr. Gandhi ensured that this revolt fails and it goes, and then the so-called independence of India goes according to the plan of the British. See, let's understand Mr. Gandhi. Mr. Gandhi spent about 20 plus years, 21 years perhaps, in South Africa.
Yeah.
Okay, he participated on behalf of the British. He took the British side. He was a lieutenant colonel, I think. He invented satyagraha in South Africa. Non-violent, passive resistance. We will not fight. We will just passively resist. And the British apparently liked it very much. It's a very nice thing. Mr. Gandhi overnight became a star. Now, how does one overnight become a superstar? There has to be some power behind you, right?
Yeah.
And purpose of the Indian National Congress was to shepherd the Indian freedom struggle in a gentle, non-violent direction. Okay? The freedom struggle should not be violent.
So, you mean to say it was planned by the British?
Clearly. Now, Mr. Gandhi was a very sharp, intelligent man. He understood what power is. Why did he not order the Indian armed forces to go on strike? So Mr. Gandhi fooled everybody. Now, so partition became essentially a formality because the British wanted to do partition. Mr. Gandhi went along with it, and Mr. Jinnah also wanted this.
But on that note, didn't Gandhi go on a hunger strike against the partition? Why Gandhi always, took a side of Nehru? Always he supported him over Patel.
Well, who else supported Mr. Nehru?
No.
Can you guess who else supported Mr. Nehru? The British.
Oh yeah.
The British loved Mr. Nehru. He was an Anglophile.
Here we have the expert in history and geopolitics, the one and only Abhijit Chavda, and I'm really honored to have him as a guest for my first ever podcast. I kind of spoke to him before this shoot for some time, and I'm already blown up with the kind of knowledge he has. So without wasting any more time, let's dive into the topic. Welcome, sir.
Podcast. It's a real pleasure. I'm really glad to see the great work you're doing.
So I'm really grateful that you actually decided to come. You're my first guest. Thank you so much for coming here, sir.
My pleasure.
And so, if you have to dive into the topic, I have a lot of doubts on that, freedom movement. I think it has a lot of gray area. What we studied in college or school is like, mostly it's about the freedom movement. It's about Ahimsa movement led by Gandhiji. And especially one thing I am not sure of is that the cause for the freedom, whatever it is that, it's been mentioned, it's been portrayed like, the main reason for how we got freedom is because of the Second World War. British kind of lost in that, so they kind of couldn't deal with the Indians anymore, so they kind of left. So it has a lot of grey areas, especially as someone, I've been worshipping Gandhiji, but when you came out and read the, story behind the scenes, it's kind of really shocking, and it's kind of, I feel really, I couldn't believe that it's happened because that's the man I worshipped. But now it's kind of taking a different turn now. So maybe if you could shed some light on that topic, it would be great.
Yes, the Indian independence struggle, the freedom movement, independence, all that is a very interesting topic, and we have been taught a certain flavor of history or certain version of history. But when we examine the actual events, you kind of see something that is not exactly in tune with what we've been taught. So, Mr. Gandhi is credited with the independence of India. We are told that it is Mr. Gandhi and his non-violent struggle that gave India independence, right? That's what we are taught. So there are multiple questions in this. First of all, why did independence happen in 1947? Why not in 1925? For instance, why not 1925? Or why not 1950? Why only 1947? And secondly, was it the Second World War that caused India's independence? Was it Mr. Gandhi who did it? Was it somebody else who did it? Multiple questions that we can unpack over here. So first of all, let's talk about why India was given independence or whatever it was given in 1947. India did not get independence in 1947. India got dominion status. India became a dominion of the crown and the head of state was the King of England. It's only in 1950 that India
No,
became...
this can't be real.
It is true.
No.
Please look it up.
Oh my God, seriously.
Yes, I would invite all the audience to do their own due diligence and see if I am telling the truth or if I am inventing history.
Oh my God.
Okay, so in 1947, 15th of August, India was given dominion status. India became a dominion of the crown. India's head of state was the King of England. In 1950 or whenever it was that India became a republic, 26th of January, that's when India became actually independent.
Oh,
Okay, now why 1947? Why not 1948? Why not 1950 that India became a dominion? There's a reason for this. So we will go into the partition matter later after this, but why 1947, right? So in 1945, the Second World War ended. It was a terrible disaster for Europe. Europe was devastated. Britain was also devastated by the German bombardments, by their cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. So, and by that time, they had already extracted whatever they wanted out of India. By 1945, 1946, India's GDP was around 2% of the world's GDP. When the British came to India, India's GDP was the largest GDP in the world, 27% roughly of the entire world's GDP. So they had taken everything of value out of India. And by 1947, India's life expectancy was around 30, 32, maybe 28, somewhere around that figure.
Yes.
So India was a destroyed nation, devastated nation. So there was nothing more left to extract, first of all. And yeah, Britain was very deeply, essentially destroyed to a certain extent by the Second World War. So one could say that the Second World War could have contributed. But there is another thing. The British could have extended their stay in India longer. But something happened in 1946. So in 1946, the Second World War is over. And the British had used the Indian armed forces to fight many of their battles across Europe, across Africa, Northern Africa and other places. Now, India had a very powerful navy, the British Indian Navy or the Royal Indian Navy, whatever you want to call it. The Indian Navy had 78 ships. And the British used the Indian Navy to control an enormous geographical region from the Strait of Hormuz in the Persian Gulf all the way to the Strait of Malacca, which is near Singapore. Huge area. Because of the 78 ships, the British could control it. Now the Second World War is over and most of the sailors are being brought back to India and they were being disbanded. Many of the sailors were being sent back to civilian life. But this process was taking a very long time. And the sailors were being mistreated by the British commanders, a lot of racism, a lot of abuse. So in 1946, I think it was in February perhaps, I don't remember which month, but early 1946, the Indian Navy sailors revolted against the British.
Yeah, the naval mutiny.
The naval revolt, naval mutiny. There are many names that it is called by.
Okay.
So the sailors revolted. It starts in Mumbai. Then it was called Bombay, and because they had the wireless system, almost immediately the entire navy went on strike. Revolted essentially. 78 ships suddenly go out of the British control. 78 powerful naval warships. One or two kind of supported the British, but everybody else revolted against the British. So overnight, what happens is that the British lose control of the entire Indian Navy. So we have to understand why the British were able to rule India. The British ruled India by force, not by non-violence.
That raises one more question actually. Could have Indian army done the same thing now, what the naval mutiny done? If they did it, we would have got independence much earlier, right?
So let's come to that.
Okay.
Okay, so 1946, around February, the Indian Navy revolts. Now, this happens at sea. Okay, and it happens in Mumbai, it happens in Visakhapatnam, it happens in Karachi. Eventually, after 2-3 days, the people in Mumbai start rioting on the streets. Then they are shot at, maybe hundreds of people die. In Karachi also, in Visakhapatnam also, our historians don't write about this. But until now, the Indian army did not know about this. They had kept it very quiet, the British. What was happening on the ships, the Indian army did not know about this.
Okay.
Had the Indian army come to know that the Navy has revolted, and had the Indian army also joined hands, it was end of story for the British Raj immediately.
Yeah.
Because the entire basis of British rule in India was military force.
Yes.
Was hard force. It was the army and the police force and the navy, all that. So the Indian army did not come to know about this. The sailors all went on strike, or they revolted, and on the ships they put up 3 flags. One was the Indian National Congress flag, one was the Muslim League flag, and one was the Communist Party flag. At that time there were 3 main parties. Now, Mr. Jinnah of the Muslim League, he did not support the strike. He wanted partition. He wanted Pakistan. But if the Indian Navy goes on strike and they succeed, then India will be given freedom. India will acquire freedom by force without being partitioned. It will be a united India. So that was bad for Jinnah.
Yeah.
He had an agenda. So Jinnah did not support the strike, the revolt. Gandhi, Mr. Gandhi, he also opposed, very strongly he opposed the revolt.
What?
Yes, he said this is horrible. We cannot do such things.
But that also happened in a ahimsa manner, na? According to him, like
They
because.
didn't, yeah.
But how can he be against that? Because they didn't, fight against anybody. They were
They
actually
did
on
not
the
shoot
side.
anybody. They did not beat anybody. They simply stopped cooperating with the British. It was, in a way, a satyagraha.
Yeah.
There was some firing. I mean, just to show the force of the Indian Navy, they fired at the port of Bombay, I think. Yeah, some firing was there. But I don't think anybody was killed in that.
Okay.
So it was more or less, you could say 99.8% non-violent. Okay, this entire revolt. So Mr. Gandhi says that this is unacceptable. I will not accept this. I will not tolerate this. And Mr. Gandhi sent Mr. Patel to Bombay to negotiate with the rebels, with the Indian Navy sailors. So Mr. Gandhi gave Mr. Patel the task of negotiating with the Indian Navy sailors and convince them to end the revolt. So Mr. Patel comes to Bombay. He starts negotiations with the Indian Navy mutineers, rebels, whatever. He says that nobody is going to support you. The Communist Party supported that, but they were not very significant. So Mr. Patel told them that the Muslim League will not support you. The Congress will also not support you. And I give you the guarantee, I give you my word that if you put down your weapons and you surrender, then nothing will be done against you. You will not be persecuted, prosecuted, nothing will be done. So what happened is, because of this, is that the sailors became demoralized. That we have no political support at all. And they surrendered. Within a week's time, in less than a week's time, the entire thing was over. The moment they surrendered, they were arrested and they were court-martialed. So Mr. Patel gave a false promise.
Oh my God.
This is a matter of record. Okay. So had this revolt lasted longer and had the Indian army come to know about this, they would also most likely have joined hands, and then there would be no basis left for the British rule in India. So overnight, India would have got independence in 1946 itself, and a united India would have got independence, and it would be the army that would be in power, not the politicians, the Congress or Muslim League or whatever. And the Indian army was greatly influenced by Subhash Bose and his Indian National Army. There was a great amount of sympathy for what Subhash Chandra Bose was doing. So this was a very dangerous moment for the Muslim League and the Congress Party and the agenda of partition. So Mr. Gandhi ensured that this revolt fails and it goes, and then the so-called independence of India goes according to the plan of the British, and India gets partitioned.
But that's sad, na? Like, Gandhiji was for, he dedicated his whole life for India.
One wonders what he dedicated his whole life to.
But
You should read what he himself wrote. See, let's understand Mr. Gandhi. Mr. Gandhi spent about 20 plus years, 21 years perhaps, in South Africa.
yeah.
Okay, he was born into a very wealthy family, very powerful family. His father was the prime minister of the state of Junagadh, was it? Porbandar. And then he became, so he was a very powerful man, very rich man, very wealthy man. Mr. Gandhi was sent to England to learn his trade as a lawyer. He was educated in England. He became a lawyer. He came back to India, did not get any work. Then he went to South Africa because somebody called him there. And for 20 plus years, he had a career as a lawyer or something else in South Africa. And he fought, he participated in what was called the Boer War on behalf of the British. He took the British side. He was a lieutenant colonel, I think. Okay, in the army. He was not allowed to fire weapons, but he was an ambulance driver. He was a stretcher bearer. He helped the injured British troops. So he had a military rank. And it's very interesting to read the writings of Mr. Gandhi while he was in South Africa. He said that I have put my life in peril 3 times for the sake of the empire.
British Empire.
British Empire, the crown.
Okay.
And nobody is more loyal than me to the British Empire. You should, there is a book, very interesting book, which has been published. It's by Ashwin Desai and Ghulam Wahid, 2 South African Indians. It's called the South African Gandhi, Stretcher Bearer of Empire. So if you read that book, you will see the things that Mr. Gandhi wrote. Very interesting. So he comes back to India, I think 1915, if I am not mistaken, around that time. He was 46 years old when he comes back to India. And overnight, he becomes the superstar in the Congress party. He comes back to India as a celebrity.
Yeah, because he already led some movements and
he did all kinds of things. He invented satyagraha in South Africa. Non-violent, passive resistance. We will not fight. We will just passively resist. And the British apparently liked it very much. It's a very nice thing. So he is brought back to India. It's like he's parachuted back into India, Mr. Gandhi. And overnight he becomes a superstar in the Congress party. People like Jinnah, etc., who had been fighting for India's independence in their own way for a long time, they were totally marginalized. I'm not saying Mr. Jinnah was a good guy. We know who he was. He broke India. So I'm not pro Jinnah at all. But Mr. Gandhi overnight became a star. Now, how does one overnight become a superstar? There has to be some power behind you, right?
Yeah.
And we have to understand the history of the Indian National Congress also. It was founded by Alan Hume.
Yeah.
An Englishman, a British bureaucrat who did terrible things in India. So it was founded, and if you look at the leadership of the Indian National Congress before 1947, it was all British educated people. The rank and file may be regular people, but the top leadership was always British educated and pro-Britain.
Yeah.
So the purpose of the Indian National Congress was to shepherd the Indian freedom struggle in a gentle, non-violent direction. Okay, the freedom struggle should not be violent.
So you mean to say it was planned by the British?
Clearly. So see, imagine this. Mr. Gandhi is a superstar, right? In 1915. By 1920, he is a very big star, the biggest star in India. The great saint, Mahatma, whatever. So he had the hearts and minds of the people of India. Imagine, hypothetically, he uses this superstardom to give a message to the people of India. Go out there and kill the British. We had a population of 330 million. How many British were there? It would be over in 24 hours. So if he wanted, India could have been independent in 1920 itself or 1925 itself. But he insisted on non-violence. You know, people say violence is bad. Well, if you look at the track record of the British, between 1880 and 1920, they killed 165 million Indians in artificially engineered famines. So when you have a foreign oppressor who is occupying your country, it is perfectly legitimate to kill them all. It's called freedom, independence. We want it. They have no business being in India and killing Indians. So there are times when there are just causes for violence. A good cause for violence, right?
Yeah.
If Pakistan were to invade India, obviously we should kill them all.
For sure.
And free our land. If the Chinese want to invade India, we should destroy them. So there are good causes for violence also, you know. So if Mr. Gandhi had said kill all the British, it would have been a justifiable call to violence. Mr. Gandhi never did that. So he ensured that India's independence was delayed by at least 2 decades. Okay, as the leader, as the supreme leader of India, or the Mahatma or whatever, right? So Mr. Gandhi, if we examine, see, people look at words and not actions. If you want to understand a leader and understand the true impact, ignore everything they say. Only focus on what they do.
Exactly.
Only focus on the
Yeah.
actions, completely ignore their words. Because politicians love to talk. Today they will say something, tomorrow they will say something completely different. If you look at it, politicians, a typical politician's track record over 10 years, there are so many U-turns.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
For sure.
so I would tell the people, if you want to truly understand a leader and their legacy and their impact, ignore their words completely. He said this, he said that, but he said, I don't believe in this. Who cares? See what he did. So focus on their actions and focus on the consequences of their actions. So Mr. Gandhi delayed India's independence. That's my assessment. You people can feel free to disagree. Lots of people disagree with me. That's fine. So Mr. Gandhi, in my opinion, in my estimation, delayed India's independence by at least 2 decades. In 1946, there was a golden opportunity to free India from the British, and it was a non-violent thing. The naval rebellion was non-violent. Nobody was being killed. And had the army also participated in this, it would have been a nationwide, subcontinent-wide rebellion that the British could not end. And see, the interesting thing about Mr. Gandhi is he insisted on satyagraha, non-violence and non-cooperation movement. And he always insisted that the people of India, the ordinary man, woman and child, should not cooperate with the British. Now, Mr. Gandhi was a very sharp, intelligent man. He understood what power is. Why did he not order the Indian armed forces to go on strike against the British? Why didn't he tell the Indian army and the Indian police to go on non-violent protest, non-cooperation? It would be the end of the British rule in 1 hour. The moment the state machinery stops cooperating with the British occupiers, it was game over. I think anybody can understand that.
Yeah. It actually makes sense.
Imagine today, okay, this is a completely hypothetical fairy tale scenario. Imagine today, all the bureaucrats, all the police, all the armed forces in a country suddenly goes on strike. What happens? The government is gone.
Yeah, for sure.
The government is gone. Because without this, they have no power. These bunch of British occupiers of India, they had power over India because of the police, the armed forces and the bureaucracy. Mr. Gandhi never told these strata of the government machinery to go on strike. He always told the helpless Indian people to go on strike and to not cooperate. So Mr. Gandhi fooled everybody. I think it's amply clear if you look at it this way.
Yeah, it actually makes sense because what is going to happen as a common citizen if I refuse to cooperate with the government? Nothing is going to happen. What's going to happen if I go out and burn the clothes? That's nothing going to happen.
It's going to end up hurting you. If you go and do all that, it's going to cause a lot of inconvenience to you. You will be beaten by the police. You'll be thrown in jail. But the police is the power, right?
Yeah.
Why did he not tell the police to go on strike? Why did he not tell the army, navy and air force to go on strike? Why did he not tell the bureaucrats to go on strike? The moment they had gone on strike, it was game over for the British. And it would be completely non-violent.
Yeah.
No need to fire a single shot. So what was Mr. Gandhi doing? And even today we are told that Mr. Gandhi gave us independence.
It's really, to be honest, really heartbreaking for me to, I never imagined Gandhi in this perspective. I know there's negative side, but I never imagined that he could be the reason for the delayed, process and all. It's really hard. It's really heartbreaking. But then if we talk about that, even about the first Prime Minister, how Nehru became the first Prime Minister, I've seen that Sardar Patel was, elected as the first one, but Gandhi made him, withdraw that.
Interesting story.
Yeah, so
Okay, let me go into that. So, what happened is this. In 1946, the British occupiers of India held provincial elections in occupied India. Hmm? These provincial elections, in these elections, how many Indians voted? 13% of the eligible adult population of India was allowed to vote. How much? 13%. So, by that standard, this is not a representative election. And imagine that the Nazi Germans, after they occupied France, held an election in France. Do you think that's a legitimate election?
of course not.
Of course not. But we consider British elections,
Yeah.
elections held under British occupation to be legitimate because we are brainwashed,
Yeah.
right? So 1946, first of all, the elections were held under foreign occupation by foreign occupiers. That makes the elections completely illegitimate. Secondly, less than 13% of the eligible adult population of India was allowed to vote. So once again, it is completely illegitimate. Now, these elections, the Muslim League and the Congress Party got the majority of the shares. The Congress Party got, I think, more than 900 seats. Big win. Now, so partition became essentially a formality because the British wanted to do partition. Mr. Gandhi went along with it, and Mr. Jinnah also wanted this.
But on that note, didn't Gandhi go on a hunger strike against the partition?
But why didn't he ask the police and the army and everybody to stop cooperating? Then the partition was over. He going on hunger strike is a symbolic gesture.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Okay. Ask the army and the air force and the navy and the police and the bureaucracy to go on hunger strike, all of them together. Or just stop cooperating. No need to strike, go on hunger strike. Then partition won't happen. Completely non-violent. No violence required. So if he really was against partition, he kept saying partition will happen over my dead body. But it happened and he was still alive.
Yeah.
So Mr. Gandhi actually was perfectly happy with partition. He knew what was going to happen and he went on saying these things just to keep up appearances, but partition happened. Okay. So after partition happened, etc. So in 1946, the Congress, I think, won more than 900 seats. So it was a major party. And in 1946, after this fake election, fraudulent election, the Congress party was required to appoint a new president. So what is the procedure for the appointment of a president? There were, I think, 15, if I remember correctly, 15 different Pradesh Congress committees.
Yes. Yeah.
15. And they all had to give a nomination of one person. So I think 12 of them nominated somebody and 3 abstained from nomination.
Yeah.
Each of these 12 Pradesh Congress committees nominated only one person.
Patel.
Sardar Patel,
Yeah.
Vallabhbhai Patel, and 3 did not nominate anybody. So Mr. Patel got 12 nominations and nobody else got a nomination. And even before the nominations were done, Mr. Gandhi had indicated that he wanted Mr. Nehru to be the president of the Congress party. And yet all these Pradesh Congress committees voted for Mr. Patel. So Mr. Patel was a clear winner, 12-0. Then what happens is that Mr. Gandhi spoke with Mr. Patel and told him to withdraw his candidature. Now understand something very interesting. Mr. Gandhi had resigned from the primary membership of the Congress party, I think in 1934. So Mr. Gandhi was not even a member of this political party. And yet he was able to get Mr. Patel to withdraw his candidature, and then he had somebody propose Mr. Nehru's name, and that's how completely illegitimately Mr. Nehru became the Congress president, despite not getting a single nomination. And Mr. Gandhi, who was not even a member of the Congress party, was able to engineer all this. Is this democracy?
In no way, but why Gandhi always, took a side of Nehru? Always he supported him over Patel.
Well, who else supported Mr. Nehru?
No.
Can
Nobody.
you guess who else supported Mr.
Nobody.
Nehru? The British.
Oh, yeah.
The British loved Mr. Nehru. He was an Anglophile. He identified, these days anybody can identify as male or female, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Wokeism.
Yeah.
So Mr. Nehru identified as an Englishman, even though he had brown skin. Okay, so he was culturally British He was an Anglophile, and so the British really wanted Mr. Nehru to become the president of the Congress Party, because since the Congress Party had the largest number of seats, whoever became the president of the Congress Party in 1946 would automatically become the first Prime Minister of India. So the British wanted Mr. Nehru. Mr. Gandhi also mysteriously wanted Mr. Nehru, even though everybody wanted Mr. Patel. So Mr. Gandhi made Mr. Patel pull out. Mr. Patel obeyed him unquestioningly. This is also interesting.
Yeah, but why? I know Patel was devoted to Gandhiji. He was like, mad follower of Gandhiji. But why did he choose Gandhiji over the nation? He could have
You have
rejected
asked
it.
the exact right question, and I don't have an answer. I don't know why Mr. Patel chose to obey Mr. Gandhi over serving the nation. He was a brilliant person,
Yeah.
very intelligent person. Even after he became the Home Minister, he warned Mr. Nehru of what the Chinese were going to do.
Yes.
So he could see things which others could not see.
Yes.
So Mr. Patel, for some reason, obeyed Mr. Gandhi, even though disobeying him would have been good for the nation.
Yeah.
And he also acted as Mr. Gandhi's agent in demoralizing the Indian Navy and making them withdraw, end their rebellion. So Mr. Patel also did certain things that, are mysterious to me. I haven't studied Mr. Patel in great detail, so I don't really have an answer. But these are the actions. You have to judge a person by their actions. I'm not saying Mr. Patel has to be put in the same bracket as Mr. Gandhi or Mr. Nehru. Mr. Patel was a million times better. Okay, but yeah, these things he did, and that was not good for India. Had Mr. Patel refused to step down, and had he gone ahead and been the first Prime Minister, things would have been very different.
Yeah.
Things would have been very, very different. But who knows? There must be some hidden things that we don't know about. Maybe if he did that, something would happen to him because the British were all powerful. That's also a possibility.
Possibly.
So he knew how things were going to go anyway. So he went along with that's a possibility. So that is how Mr. Gandhi was able to engineer this weird coup within the Congress Party. He had done a coup before also. He had got Mr. Bose outmaneuvered, right, and expelled from the Congress Party eventually. So Mr. Gandhi was great at doing these things, political maneuvering, backroom maneuvering, and all that. So that's how Mr. Nehru became the president of the Congress Party in 1946, and on 14 August 1947, Pakistan became a dominion of Britain. And the next day, India became a dominion of Great Britain. In 1950, India became a republic, and that's the actual independence. So 15th of August 1947 is India's Dominion Day, Dominion Status Day. It is not Independence Day. Please look at the actual records. If I am wrong, tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah,
but first
I know
look it up.
that the Viceroy was still some British man after the independence.
Mr. Mountbatten, Lord Mountbatten. So this is also interesting. Pakistan, once they became dominion, they did not appoint an Englishman. Mr. Jinnah himself became the whatever it was, right? But in the case of India, an Englishman was appointed as the Viceroy, or what was it? Governor General, Viceroy, whatever it was, right? Whatever position it was. Why? Why an Englishman? Why not an Indian?
Exactly, for independent nation, why?
It was not independent, but still.
But that's what we have been
Do you know
told
that
now.
the chief of the Indian Army until the 1950s was an Englishman?
This can't be said.
It goes into the Army, the Navy, the Air Force. Until the late 50s, one of these three big positions was occupied by an Englishman.
But how does
why?
it make any sense? Like,
The question is India still free? Is India, we are still mentally colonized. We are having this conversation in a foreign language. It's not your language, it's not my language. Everything is like this. What has changed? What changed after 1947? The same system continued. The same bureaucracy continued.
Yeah.
The same police force continued. The police, we need a bureaucracy, we need army, all that. But the system has to change. The structure has to change. It has to become pro-India, pro-people.
Yeah.
So the only thing that happened is that the British left and another bunch of people came here, and the same thing continued. The education system remained the same.
Yeah.
Everything remained the same.
Even if we take the police system, any common people would afraid to go to a police station.
Because of the system the British
yeah.
created. Because
Yeah.
the system was designed in such a way that the police should oppress the common person of
Yes,
India
exactly.
to keep them down.
Yeah, exactly.
But after 47, what was the need for that?
Yeah, because the police essentially for the people should, for the independent nation, in an independent nation,
Protect and
it
serve
should be,
the people. Yeah.
But even if you go to the police station as a common man, I don't know about the north side, but in Tamil Nadu, no common man will go to a police station unless it's extreme. It's at the extreme point. It's like you'll be treated so badly there. I have been treated so badly in police stations personally. People will, there will be no respect for you, so they'll treat you as someone much in a lesser position like that. So even it's exactly the same system is continued in British. If the people were treated like that, but in independent India, it's still the same now.
So that's my point. You are absolutely right that nothing has really changed. The same power structures continued, the same systems continued. And understand this, the British destroyed India totally thoroughly. They sucked all the wealth, all the value out of India, but they put certain Indian people in very privileged positions. Their servants, people who served the British, if you were Indian and you served the British, you were in a privileged position.
Okay.
And those people became extremely rich. Those people are still rich.
Yeah, even in
The
Tamil
British
Nadu.
took away the lands of all Indians. There was something called the Riot Act, RYOT, Riot Act. Some people may have studied this in history.
Yes.
So in the 1800s, there was something called the Riot Act, which essentially stole the lands of all Indians. Today, most Indians don't have any land today.
Yes.
Until the 1800s, every Indian had some land in their village, ancestral village. You would be connected to the land. The British took away all Indians, all the lands of the Indians, and they reduced the people to simply being indentured laborers on their own land. But now the lands are owned by somebody else. After independence, why was not every Indian person or every Indian family given some land back? That's real independence. That is real independence. You are independent only when you have a real stake in the nation. So there were so many things that could have been done to bring real independence to India, but nothing like that happened. So those people who were disenfranchised by the British during the 200 plus year occupation of India, they essentially are still disenfranchised today. And those few people who were privileged because of British generosity, their descendants are still privileged.
That's so
And you
true.
can see dynasties in not only politics but in certain other institutions also,
Yes,
which I will not name.
It's there for sure.
And those dynasties go back to the 1940s and before.
Yeah.
So this is the reality of India. We still haven't really become independent. We are still colonized. When the slave will whip himself after the master is gone, the master's work is done. So he is gone, the master is gone, but the slave is still whipping himself. That's what's happening in India. These British, they created these fake artificial divisions within the country. And today we have made those divisions worse. We are still fighting among each other. Our identity is always a sub-national identity. My language is different from your language. My so-called caste is different from your caste. And we hate each other. What is this? We are fighting each other. We insist on fighting each other all the time. So that's what we see everywhere today. I'm sure in every state you have something like this, these political divisions, other divisions, ideological divisions, linguistic divisions, religious divisions, and we just keep fighting. Imagine a nation like India, it has so much energy and vitality, but it is all spent on fighting itself instead of going together in one direction. We can change the world if we all unite together, but we will not unite. I mean, we can unite if the right leadership is in place. I'm not saying the wrong leadership in place, but it needs to be unified somehow. And that's not what we are seeing right now.
So true. But when we talk about Nehru, I know his foreign policy is super messed up. I've read something about it. But there's this argument comes from the other side that what Nehru was given was a different India. It was a completely destroyed nation. The GDP was low. The people were, dying of hunger. It was completely a destroyed nation. So he did what he could do at his best.
Good.
So I think that's a sensible argument. But
Okay.
So, but we still, but it doesn't, justify his foreign policy. That's super messed up. I don't understand why would anyone do that kind of things to a nation as a prime minister. But still, this argument, I think it makes a little sense. But yeah.
So let's look at Mr. Nehru's economic policy for a change. Mr. Nehru believed in something called Fabian socialism,
Okay.
which is one of the slowest and least performing branches of socialism. The USSR was officially a socialist nation.
Yes.
They were totally devastated in the Second World War by the Germans, by the Nazis. They lost millions of people fighting the Nazis, the Soviets. But by 1945, after the Second World War is over, they were able to industrialize. Well, the industrialization happened in the 40s itself, while the war was still going on. But their socialism was such that the nation became a superpower. A major industrial power, a major military power, major economic power. That's what socialism did under Stalin to the USSR. Mr. Nehru was also a socialist. So what happened with the same socialism in India? India was growing at 2%, 3%, 4% per year. They call it the Hindu rate of growth. It's actually the Nehruvian rate of growth. A nation which is totally destroyed, it can rise so fast. If you have already risen to a high level, then your growth will be slow. But if you are rising from nowhere, the growth initially is going to be very fast, 10% per year it can grow. So actually, the nation that Mr. Nehru got, it had a perfectly well-functioning bureaucracy, a massive navy, a really battle-hardened army, a great police force. This nation could have risen very fast. Look at Japan. 1945, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the Americans tested 2 nuclear weapons on the population of Japan. Japan was flattened. See how fast Japan rose after 1945. So why could India not rise like that?
But maybe Japan was a small nation with small population. India is different. But of course, it's still...
India had a very well-oiled bureaucracy,
Yeah.
a nationwide governance machinery.
Governance.
Okay, let's say it would not have grown perhaps at 10%, at least 6%, at least 7%. When you are rising from zero, you grow very fast initially, then you slow down.
Yes.
If you do it properly.
Yeah.
So Mr. Nehru somehow did not want India to rise. I mean, that's what his policies tell us. I don't care what he said. He was great at talking. He was a great orator.
Which most politicians are.
Yeah. I mean, all great politicians, effective politicians are great
Yeah.
orators. So Mr. Nehru was great at speaking. His English was commendable.
Yeah.
Brilliant English. He was more English than most Englishmen, He spoke very good English. But I don't care what he said and how he spoke. Look at the actions and look at the consequences of the actions. So that's the thing. So Mr. Nehru was given a broken nation, but a broken nation rises very fast, especially with a large population, young population which we had. Why could the youth and the vitality of India not be harnessed at the time? So I don't agree with those who argue that Mr. Nehru was given, he could not do much at the time because India was broken. No, it's the opposite. India could have risen very fast. So that's the thing. Now his foreign policy is even more messed up as we know.
Yes. Oh, that's so bad. Like I couldn't even understand. Even an uneducated common man wouldn't do that kind of things. Like, why would a prime minister, an educated man, would just give away land as it's of his own,
like its own property?
Yeah. Like even he refused to take some of the territories that were wanted to annex with India. Like, why would you do that? Like, what could be the reason behind it? Like, I don't understand at all.
So, I also don't understand why he did certain things. Maybe I do, but I don't have any evidence. We can only look at his actions. So, Kashmir.
Yeah.
The Maharaja of Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh, was very clear that he wanted Kashmir to be a part of India, Jammu and Kashmir. He signed the document of accession and he sent it to the government of India. It was rejected not once but 3 times. In 1947, 3 times it was rejected. Then the Pakistanis under Mr. Jinnah invaded Jammu and Kashmir. A significant portion it fell to the Pakistanis. The Pakistanis were just a few hours away from Srinagar. Then again the Maharaja sent the document of accession, signed. And it was Mr. Mountbatten who accepted it, not Mr. Nehru. So then Mr. Patel was given the go-ahead as the Home Minister to send the Indian Army to Jammu and Kashmir, and they were able to stop the Pakistani terrorists from coming further. Srinagar was saved, and then by I think 48 or 49, I don't remember which date it is. I think on 1st of January 1949, Mr. Nehru unilaterally declared a ceasefire. The Pakistanis had not declared a ceasefire; they were still fighting.
Yes.
But Mr. Nehru said, "Okay, we'll stop now." So the Indian Army was not allowed to go further ahead and liberate the rest of Jammu and Kashmir. And Mr. Nehru instead chose to go to the United Nations.
Yeah.
He took the problem to the United Nations. It is still there.
Yes.
And Jammu and Kashmir is still divided into POK and Jammu and Kashmir. And now some of it has been given by the Pakistanis to China. So this is a problem which was created by Mr. Nehru himself. There was no provision for the government of India to refuse a princely state's accession to India once they've signed it. So on what grounds did Mr. Nehru refuse 3 times? On what grounds? There was no provision for the government of India to refuse a signed document of accession.
But I don't understand why. Like, a princely state wants to annex with India means, why would you refuse it as a prime minister? Like, on what ground it happened? Like, nobody questioned it at that time. Like,
I don't know what was the grounds on which Mr. Nehru refused 3 times. After this thing happened, see, the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir, Maharaja Hari Singh, he signed the exact same document of accession that every other princely state signed. Exact same, no difference. But Mr. Nehru said that Jammu and Kashmir's case is special. It's a special case.
it's because of the Muslim population.
I don't know what justification he gave, but he said that the accession of Jammu and Kashmir is going to be conditional to the wishes of the people of the state. There was nothing in the legal document that said this. But Mr. Nehru unilaterally decided it's going to be like this. And he said that the Indian government will hold a plebiscite in Jammu and Kashmir. There was nothing in the document which said there should be a plebiscite. So Mr. Nehru unilaterally created the Kashmir issue. Unilaterally, on his own volition, created this problem that we are still suffering from today. I think it's all on the record. People go and if you know where to look, go and look for it. That's how it is. That's what Mr. Nehru did. Secondly, the Khan of Kalat. We have Balochistan.
Yeah.
Balochistan is currently divided into Iran and Pakistan. One of the major portions of Balochistan is Kalat. So the Khan of Kalat also wanted to join India. He wanted Kalat and Balochistan to be part of India. And he had already sent the document of accession to India. And India refused that also. And it came to light when some bureaucrat in the Indian government said this by mistake on All India Radio. And the same day he said this, the Pakistanis heard it. They sent the army to Balochistan, and Balochistan was that day occupied by Pakistan. That's how the horrible exploitative occupation of Balochistan by Pakistan started. On that day, the day the Indian bureaucrat by mistake said it on All India Radio. That Balochistan wants to join India, but we will have nothing to do with that. So that's how it happened. So Mr. Nehru rejected Balochistan's desire, Kalat's desire to join India and become part of India. And he gave it to Pakistan. He gave it over to Pakistan. The Balochi people never wanted to be part of Pakistan. That's what happened. Then we had the case of the port of Gwadar. So Gwadar is a port on the Makran coast in Balochistan. It is very close to the Iranian border. It is close to the port of Chabahar, where India has a significant stake today. So Gwadar was gifted by the Khan of Kalat to Oman in the 1800s or 1700s, somewhere around that time. Now, by the time 1947 happened, the port of Gwadar was being administered by India on behalf of Oman. So the Sultan of Oman, so Oman and India had an excellent relationship. Even today we have an excellent relationship. So the Sultan of Oman offered the port to India for free. Mr. Nehru said, we can't defend it. We are not in a position to defend this port, so we will not take it. Then the Sultan of Oman waited for about a decade, and in 1958 he sold it to Pakistan for $3 million or something. So Mr. Nehru's logic was that Gwadar is not connected to the rest of India. It is about a couple of 100 kilometers away, or whatever the distance is, so we can't defend it. That was his logic. Now imagine this. What was the geographical distance between East Pakistan and West Pakistan?
Exactly. Yeah. It's
How
like there's a whole India in middle of the two things. Like,
But they could still exist
Yeah.
as a single nation. But India could not defend Gwadar, even though India had one of the most powerful navies in the world. The Indian Navy was one of the most powerful and battle-hardened navies in the world in 1947, 1948. India could have defended Gwadar. Consider the Falkland Islands. The Falkland Islands are off the coast of Argentina, 12,000 kilometers away from Great Britain, but they are still a part of Great Britain. And the British even fought a war in the 1980s and defeated Argentina. If you have the will, you can do anything.
do
And Gwadar is not 12,000 kilometers away from India, it's right next door. Mr. Nehru did not have the will or the vision to have a strong India.
yeah, but even, if the case is like the port is so long from India, he even refused to annex Hyderabad, like Sardar Patel did. Like, it was in the, like, literally the heart of South India. But it's in the center of the, southern India. If it was not taken, it could have, the northern and southern India could have partitioned as a different nation. Obviously, in Tamil Nadu, we ask for, a lot of politicians ask for a separate nation also. So that could have literally divided the north and southern part of India if Hyderabad was not taken by, Sardar Patel. But Nehru also refused that. Even when Hyderabad was taken by, the Indian army, Nehru was not in India. He was in England, I guess.
So yeah, that's a very interesting case. So Hyderabad, the Nizam of Hyderabad, he declared independence.
Yeah.
He said he doesn't want to be part of India, not part of Pakistan. He wants to have an independent nation. And Mr. Nehru wanted to take this matter to the United Nations, just like Kashmir. But Mr. Patel was somehow able to prevail, and he launched Operation Polo only after lots of people were massacred by the Razakars of the terrorist army of the Nizam of Hyderabad. So eventually Operation Polo was launched, and in 4 or 5 days Hyderabad was liberated. The Nizam was defeated, but the Nizam was allowed to keep his property, his title, and Mr. Nehru kept good relations with him. Okay, so that's how Hyderabad thankfully was reunified with the rest of India. But if Nehru had his way, it would have gone to the United Nations. And today we would have another Kashmir there.
But it sounds like he intentionally messed up these things. It sounds like that for me, but no offense, but it kind of sounds like that for me. Even if you take the Indus Treaty, like, why would anyone do that?
It is possibly the most lopsided and unequal treaty in possibly the history of humanity. Even nations that have been defeated in war have been able to negotiate better treaties. I don't know what Mr. Nehru was thinking. 80% of the water of the Indus basin, of the Indus rivers, goes to Pakistan, only 20% comes to India. India is the much larger nation with a much larger population, much larger territory. It has more need of water, and India is the more powerful nation. And yet, we negotiated the treaty and we signed the treaty as if we were beggars.
Yeah.
And that's what Mr. Nehru did. Why? As the Prime Minister of India, his duty was to place the interest of his nation over the interest of everybody else.
Yes.
He actually did the opposite.
But could it be because of his, ideology, ahimsa thing? He wanted to maintain a good relationship with the neighbors, even though, of course, the same case happened with China also. Even though they kind of attacked India many times, he kind of still kept a good relations with them. So could it be because of his ideology, thinking he would, make a peaceful nation or something like that? Maybe his intentions were good, but the actions went bad. Could it be because of that?
So, yeah, we know that he was a disciple of Mr. Gandhi. That's what he said. So I don't know what his ideology was. I can't speculate. All I can see is his actions and the consequences. And as the leader of a country, you have only one job. It's a very simple, straightforward job. Promote the national interest.
For the nation.
Further the national interest at the expense of everything else. You as a person don't matter. If you are the leader, your ideology is not important. The nation is important. The Chinese have a saying. It doesn't matter whether the cat is black or white as long as it catches mice. Your job is to make the cat catch mice, not to have a different color or whatever. So I don't care what ideology a leader may have. Once you become the leader, you have only one job: to further and promote and serve the nation's interest and its people. That's all. And Mr. Nehru, through his actions, clearly did the opposite. When it comes to China, it's ridiculous what it did. Ridiculous.
Yeah. So, but even when we talk about the, this negative side of Nehru, or the how he messed up the foreign policy, there are a few people coming up identifying with the party. But even at that time back then, his own party members opposed him for doing all these things. Example for Ambedkar, the nationwide celebrated leader, he resigned from the cabinet citing Nehru's foreign policy failure as a reason, if I'm not wrong. So. Even there was opposition back then, but how it all went, like who are the people, why didn't they dethrone him, or get him down the power?
Well, in politics, Mao Zedong, the leader of China, had a very clear saying that political power flows out of the barrel of a gun. That's where political power comes from. So the question is, in a political party, in a nation, who controls the real hard power, which is the police, the armed forces, all that? It was the prime minister.
Yeah.
And you don't need the army to take care of enemy politicians. You just need the police.
Yeah.
You just need the threat of the police to take care of this. So I'm just saying hypothetically it could be like that. So Mr. Nehru had the real power. So even if some people would have opposed him, the entire state machinery was aligned with Mr. Nehru. The British ensured that it is like this. Mr. Gandhi ensured that Mr. Nehru gets out the power. So once he was entrenched as the Prime Minister of India, some people, whether they agreed or disagreed with him, they were inconsequential and they did not matter.
Of course. Then how about the same party, the same people, are backing Nehru as well as Ambedkar, but they were like cat and mouse.
So I don't really know much about Dr. Ambedkar because I have not studied his life and career in detail. So in the case of Dr. Ambedkar, I can't really say what his policy was, what his thoughts were. I can't really comment on him much because I haven't studied him in detail. So if I remember correctly, Dr. Ambedkar was strongly opposed to Mr. Gandhi. That's what I recall. Dr. Ambedkar said certain very strong things about Mr. Gandhi, like he had fangs and all that sort of thing. But I don't know about Dr. Ambedkar's views about Mr. Nehru. I'm not sure what it was like.
So then, if we have to take it from there, I even remember reading like Nehru wanted only his daughter to be the next prime minister. I kind of read it somewhere, but I'm not very sure. I think when I was reading about Kamaraja, I kind of remember reading like that. But he wanted the power to go to only his, family after him. So when Lal Bahadur Shastri became, we even have a movie about the mysterious death of Lal Bahadur Shastri. So how those things, how the power passed through the generations. Of course, Congress is still owned by a family. So how do you think that went?
So I am not sure about what Mr. Nehru wanted of. Well, I'm sure he would have wanted his daughter, Mrs. Gandhi, to become the next prime minister. I mean, as a father, you want that for your own child. If I am the king, I want my daughter to be the queen, next ruler. I'm sure it could be like that. But this is an aspect of history I've not studied in great detail. Now, after Mr. Nehru, Mr. Shastri comes to power, and then he dies a very mysterious death.
Yeah.
That too in a foreign country.
Yeah.
And the proper investigation is not done. Huge mystery. I think Anuj Dar has written a book about this. He has done a significant amount of research into this. Even in that case, there is no clear conclusion because some evidence is not available. Like the autopsy reports are not available, and certain things are very fishy.
Imagine the autopsy report of a prime minister is not available.
Imagine that.
Like,
yeah, so it's a big mystery. The 1960s were a very strange decade. Lal Bahadur Shastri, Prime Minister Shastri, dies mysteriously in a foreign country, and very, very mysteriously this happens. Another world leader was also mysteriously killed, President Kennedy. And even today, we don't quite know what happened, or maybe some people have some inkling of what happened. It was a very strange decade. And then obviously after Mr. Shastri died, Mrs. Gandhi became the Prime Minister, and eventually she turned out to be a very powerful Prime Minister eventually. So yeah, that's how it went. I have not studied Mrs. Gandhi's career in great detail. So that's what I can say about this. But Mr. Nehru clearly took India in a very wrong direction. Definitely.
For sure.
His foreign policy, I mean, we can talk about this for hours. Mistake after mistake after mistake. When it comes to China, he promoted China's interest over that of India. Terrible.
About that, a place in the United Nations. When the United Nations offered, he refused and recommended China to take. I mean, like, yeah.
So Mr. Nehru, he kept on insisting that China should be given a permanent veto-wielding place on the UN Security Council, not India. So the story goes like this. See,
Like, why would anyone do that?
I don't know. So the story is like this. There was a civil war in China between the Kuomintang, which is a political dispensation led by Chiang Kai-shek, and the opposition was the Chinese Communist Party led by Mao Zedong. Now we have the Second World War, so the civil war was kind of on hold. The Second World War ends in 1945. Then the Chinese Civil War resumes. But when the Second World War ended, it was won by the Allies, the US, the UK, and blah, 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 all these countries. And one of the allies in that was the Republic of China, ROC, which is the Kuomintang of Chiang Kai-shek. So they were given a permanent veto-wielding seat in the UN Security Council in 1945 when the UN was created. At that time, the Republic of China was one of the 5 permanent members. Now, in 1945, the Civil War resumed. By 1949, the Republic of China, the Kuomintang, had lost the Civil War and they were exiled to a small island called Taiwan. And Beijing and most of China, or all of China, was controlled by Mao Zedong and his Chinese Communist Party. In 1949, Mao Zedong proclaimed the establishment of the People's Republic of China. But this small little government on Taiwan, they still had the permanent seat on the UN Security Council. So clearly, this was not tenable. This was not a sustainable position. So the big powers, the US, the UK, the USSR, they started looking for an alternative. And they did not want the communists to get a permanent seat. They already had the USSR, which is a communist nation.
Yeah.
So the Americans did not want another communist nation to be on the UN Security Council as a permanent member. And the Soviets also did not trust China. So even Stalin did not trust China. So the Americans and the Soviets, they somehow seem to have reached some kind of compromise, even though the Cold War had already started, that perhaps we should give the seat to India. So India was approached. Mr. Shashi Tharoor is a very reliable person, very respected person, a member of parliament, a very high-ranking former official in the United Nations. He wrote a book, I think in 2003 or somewhere there, in which he writes that in 1953, around 1953, India was offered a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. And Mr. Nehru refused. He said, please give it to China. We will not take it at the cost of China. So there was an offer in 1950, an offer in 1953, and a third offer in 1955. 3 times India was offered a permanent veto-wielding seat on the UN Security Council. Mr. Nehru each time refused. He said, not at the cost of China. He insisted that China be given the seat that India was being offered 3 times. Eventually, people stopped respecting India because of this behavior. And in 1971, eventually China got the seat. That's how it went. The other interesting thing is this. In the early 1960s, President Kennedy offered Mr. Nehru a nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
The Americans had already tested nuclear weapons. They wanted India, democratic India, to be the first Asian power to test a nuclear weapon and to become a nuclear weapons power. The Americans were willing to transfer nuclear weapons technology to India and provide a nuclear weapon for India to test. This is before 1962. 1962, India and China go to war. China invades India. If India had become a nuclear weapons power by that time, the Chinese would not have dared to invade India in 1962 or later. And the Pakistanis in 1965 would also not have dared to invade India. Mr. Nehru refused the American offer of nuclear weapons technology.
For Ahimsa.
This is a
policy?
matter of record. I am not imagining this from thin air.
Yes.
This is a matter of record. It's published in Times of India and other big publications. It's a matter of record. Nobody can deny this. Mr. Nehru refused this. On what grounds? Grounds were ahimsa. We are non-violent.
Like, see, that's why I strongly believe a diplomatic man should handle the nation, which Sardar Patel should have been a right choice. But Nehru, but before I thought maybe his ideology led him like that, but now it makes me question his intentions, because you can't mess up all those things. Like, maybe one or two can go wrong, but every single thing you messed up, now it makes me question his intentions actually. So I remember one more thing about Vikram Sambat sir said about the death of Gandhiji, the situations like that. We know that even when I was growing up, I felt so frustrated that even the father of the nation was killed by these people. Like, what can we accept from this nation? I was so frustrated with that. But when we actually look at the circumstances, the events that was happening around that time, it makes sense to me. Like, what are the events that are happening? If you could shed some light on that, it would be easy for the people to understand why that incident happened.
So we know that it was Nathuram Godse who assassinated Mr. Gandhi. Now, Nathuram Godse has given an entire justification for why he killed Mr. Gandhi. I have not read it. Okay, and I have not gone into the life and career of Nathuram Godse. So I don't know. What I know in brief is that Nathuram Godse was very upset with Mr. Gandhi for, first of all, allowing India to be partitioned, and then blackmailing the government of India into giving some huge amount of money to Pakistan, and also being kind of anti-Hindu, pro-Muslim. That is what Mr. Godse said. So I think overall it was a big set of grievances here against Mr. Gandhi that led him to assassinate Mr. Gandhi. That's what I know in brief. I think the book is available. I think it's called Why I Killed Gandhi or something like that. I have not read it. And I have never really been interested in Mr. Gandhi, why he died and who killed him. I was interested in his life, his actions, and the consequences of that. Eventually, he died, he was assassinated. I don't really know the exact detailed justification that Nathuram Godse gave. But yeah, that's what happened.
But it's not about the justification. But as Vikram Sambat sir said, if you look at the events of that time, we just got independence, like as you said, it's a million, like, yeah, exactly. So the partition has happened, like millions of people got killed, raped, people were homeless. There's so many, country was literally mourning for everything. So the condition was like that, and within I think 2 months, Pakistan attacked the Kashmir, and that issue was going on. So at that time, Gandhiji goes on a hunger strike in requesting to give the government of India, I think it's around 55 crores for that's a lot sum of money.
For that time, it was a huge amount of money.
Huge amount of money. But those people are attacking us. When the partition happened, a lot of people are dying here, homeless. So if we can imagine the situation, he goes on a hunger strike, requesting Indian government to give money to Pakistan for what? Blackmailing actually. For what? To attack us back, to make them efficient to attack us back. Like, that doesn't make sense at all. So as a common Indian, I can understand what made them to take that extreme decision of even if any leader does that now, he would be killed now, obviously. But of course I respect Gandhiji, but I grew up worshipping him. But this is not a justification, but it makes sense if we imagine that's happening now.
Yes. Say clearly, I don't believe in violence. I totally condemn any assassination of anybody. So what Nathuram Godse said in his statement, I think in front of the court or whatever it was, is that he killed Mr. Gandhi because of Mr. Gandhi's actions, which he saw as being anti-India and anti-Hindu. I believe that's what he said. I have not read the statement, but I have a general idea of what he said. So Mr. Gandhi, he helped the British partition India. He did not prevent the partition of India. He did not take any action that would have prevented the partition. And then he blackmailed essentially the government of India into giving Pakistan a very large sum of money. I don't remember the exact sum, but it was a very large sum of money for that time. At a time when Pakistan was waging war against India.
Yes.
Yes. So because of these things, Mr. Godse said that that's why he assassinated Mr. Gandhi. And obviously, Mr. Godse was taken to trial and he was sentenced to death and he was hanged. And which is kind of ironical because Mr. Gandhi did not believe in violence. And yet the ultimate violence was done to his assassin Godse, but that's part of history. So I would say that assassination is wrong, violence is wrong, but these things happen in history. And that's part of our history and we have to learn the lessons from that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, at the same time, we'll have to see both the sides of the issue.
We have to see all the sides.
Yeah.
Right side, wrong side, positive side, negative side.
Yeah.
We have to be dispassionate and not be emotional when examining history. Look at what happened and try and understand why these things happened.
Yeah.
And what were the consequences and effects of those things.
Which is something I feel terribly emotional connect. I strongly connect with history with emotion.
I totally understand. When we first come across something that is new, it is natural for all human beings to react with emotions. So, okay, give yourself one day to be emotional. Be angry or be happy or whatever. But afterwards, once the emotions subside, all emotions eventually come down. You come back to the equilibrium position. Then you have to think logically as to why this happened.
Yeah.
There is always a logic. There is always a cause and effect chain in history. History is an incredibly long chain of cause and effect. If you change some cause somewhere 100 years ago, the entire history will be different. History is all about the cause and effect chain.
Exactly.
And if you understand the logic as to why things happen, then you can actually start looking into the future. And that's why if you study history deeply, you actually start understanding geopolitics.
Yeah, I feel it's kind of interconnected because sometimes I don't understand politics that much, but sometimes when I see your videos especially, I feel history is kind of interconnected with the geopolitics. So
geopolitics is all about what's happening right now. The big power struggles in the world today. But why are these struggles happening? Why is, let's say, China in the position that it is? Why is India in the position that it is? Why is the US in a particular position? It's all because of things that happened in the past. It's all about the causes and the effects that have led us to where we are today. And to try and understand what could happen in the future, we have to look at past history because the same things happen over and over again in cycles. Empires rise and empires fall. Exactly. Kings come and kings go. Nations rise, nations fall, civilizations crumble. It happens over and over again. So if you understand the cycles of history, you can actually perhaps get a sense of what's coming in the next decade, next two decades.